Oh, cool poster. I remember another company back in the day that had really cool posters for its movies too. Embryo is brought to us by director Patricio Valadares and stars Romanio Perezzo and Domingo Guzman. We follow Evelyn and Kevin, played by Perezzo and Guzman, a young couple in Chile that are going on a camping trip. And while on this camping trip, Kevin proposes to Evelyn. So it seems like everything's going great for these two lovers until night falls and some strange lights and noises start coming from the wood. Upon investigating, Evelyn disappears and Kevin freaks out, going all over the woods looking for her for hours. He eventually finds her lying naked in a ball, covered in some kind of weird goo or something, not really knowing what the hell happened or where she's been. After visiting a doctor, she finds out that she is apparently pregnant, and not only that, she hungry. So hungry, in fact, that she eats his ass. Well, not necessarily his ass, it's more his throat and face. Suffice to say that she kills him and eats him, and that's not normal behavior for Evelyn. Being understandably freaked out by this, Kevin grabs Evelyn and they go on the run as they try and figure out why she goes on this murderous zombie-like rage and just wants to eat people, and what exactly is residing within Evelyn's stomach. Embryo starts with a lengthy bit of exposition text that's plastered up on screen that lets us know that the area that this movie takes place in is reportedly a place where lots of unexplained alien activity go on. Lots of people have claimed to have been abducted or just disappeared entirely on this mountain in Chile. Now, the main story of Embryo of Evelyn and Kevin is okay. It's nothing like mind-blowing or anything, but it's alright. I was okay with it for the most part. As it went on, it got a little bit more and more out there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that's not even really the biggest issue I had with this movie. This movie can't really make up its mind what it is. It's really scatterbrained and just all over the place. It actually tells like 3 or 4 stories at once. Honestly, I can't remember. It bounces around so much. It goes back in time and shows us some video footage, Blair Witch style, of some people that got lost on the mountain and what happened to them supposedly. There's a story about a cop that's investigated a lot of these cases and some of the personal issues he's dealing with. There's the Evelyn and Kevin story. Then there's another story of some people that went out there. We don't get a whole lot with them, but they went out there and apparently some shit went down. There's just stories all over the place. It's a little bit odd, the structure of it all. It doesn't really come together coherently. That and some of the sections that they show us are a bit odd. Take for instance the one I was talking about a minute ago, the people that went out, it was kind of like Blair Witch style. It's supposed to be a film crew. They're out making a music video or something. You're not 100% sure exactly what happens. You kind of figure it out. You know, some people die, some people do some weird things, there's some lights, etc., but you don't know exactly what it is that went down here. And I'm cool with that. Preserving that mystery of everything that's going on, that's fine, but the way that it's presented is they pretty much just show us these lost tapes of these people out in the woods and the stuff happening, but it's like 20 or so minutes long of just random tapes of these people walking around. It's like if you took the Blair Witch Project and condensed it all down to 20 minutes, and like the end part isn't the majority of it. The end part is only like maybe 30 seconds. The rest of it is just people aimlessly walking around the woods and talking about random things. That's what this is for like 20 or so minutes, or at least it felt like that. It was a long time. And you don't know why. It just, in the middle of the movie, cuts to black and then goes into this section of the movie and you're like, what am I watching? What is going on here? You figure it out as it goes on, and typically I like when movies don't, treat me dumb like I've said before and let me figure things out, but you gotta have some kind of context. You never really know until the very end of the movie what, or at least why you're seeing this thing. And then even after the end of the movie, when you get your reason for having seen this stuff, it doesn't justify watching 20 minutes worth of this stuff. I mean, they set it up like this is a really important part of the movie, and it's just not. Really, none of the other stories or side quests that you see throughout this movie that it randomly cuts to have anything to do with anything at all. They all deal with this area and something that may have happened to some of these people, but they're not relevant beyond that to the main story that's going on, beyond just fluffing out the runtime. And believe me, even though they do definitely fluff that runtime out, they ain't doing this story any favors. None of these side stories are particularly interesting, and some of them just slam the brakes on the story altogether. Honestly, they should have just cut all that shit out and made this a 35 to 45 minute long short film. It may not have been a full-length film at that point, but the story and execution would have benefited immensely from doing that. Now, the main show here about Kevin and Evelyn does start out interesting, but about halfway through, it starts to go astray as well, especially the ending of the movie. After the initial encounter, there's just not a whole lot that's very interesting here. You got two people that are just kind of on the run, I guess. It never really says if people are actually after them or if anybody would even know to be after them. Yes, they leave some bodies in their wake. I'm sure the authorities are after someone, but it's not like anybody ever could put their finger on them and say, oh, it's these two, go after them. But they're like on the run, fugitive style, like everybody's after them, but nobody really knows it's them. That and the end of the movie just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it's not just like the very end, that doesn't make a lot of sense either, but the entire third act doesn't. Once this third act kicks off, there's some really odd things that happen that I feel like I missed part of the movie. There are some people that show up and take one of our characters captive for a short period of time, and I really don't know who the hell these people were, where they came from, what they were doing. They just showed up and were like super aggressive all of a sudden towards this character and took him prisoner, and I have no clue who they were or where they came from. But all that aside, once you get to the very end of the movie, what happens there is just kind of like, oh, what? Okay, sure, I guess something happened? I kind of get what happened, but what was the point of all this? By the end of this movie, you just feel like the movie has really wasted your time. And that's unfortunate because the idea behind this movie does offer up an interesting premise that could be entertaining, but unfortunately, it's just not really. Now, performance-wise, this is a hell of a mixed bag. Our two main players do pretty good for the most part. There's a couple of trip-ups here or there, but for the most part, they're commendable. Especially considering the material they have to work with, I think they did pretty good. But everybody else is so hit and miss, and a lot more miss than hit. They range from like, okay, I guess I can deal with it, bearable, all the way down to fucking god-awful terrible trash. And though our two main players do a fairly good job, especially compared to everyone else, the vast majority of the people in this movie are pretty bad. So unfortunately, overall, the performances in this movie are pretty subpar. Now technically, much like the rest of the movie, it is a pretty mixed bag. However, it does fare a bit better in this department than it does in the narrative and performance department. The movie is low budget, and you can tell, but it does look fairly good from a picture quality standpoint. Camera angles are okay. It's a whole lot of handheld going on here, but for the most part, they keep it fairly steady. I'll give them that. You can tell the people behind the camera at least somewhat know what they're doing here. The few effects that we get are pretty good. There's quite a bit of practical here, especially the gore, and a lot of the gore, surprisingly enough, is pretty good, and it does ratchet things up very quickly when it comes on screen. There's a couple of moments where it looks a little bit cheesy, but I think that was less the effect and more the performance attached to the effect. The performances of like some of these people's necks being ripped out and things like that are kind of funny at times, but the actual effect for the most part looks pretty good. Now, part of the movie is shot in a found footage format, kind of like the Blair Witch Project. So those parts of the movie, it looks like shit. It looks like somebody walking around with a camcorder and shaking it all over the fucking place. But that is the vibe they were going for in these sections of the movie. But even though that is what they were going for, I kind of can fault them because even though that's what they're going for, it still doesn't look good. Overall, however, from a technical standpoint, especially compared to everything else in this movie, the movie is competent at least. It's okay. Guys, there's not really a lot more I can say about Embryo. It's just not really a very good movie. Narratively, it's a fucking mess. Performances are just really all over the place. Technically, it's okay, but those technical attributes are nowhere near enough to make up for all the other shortcomings here. Overall, this movie is kind of a waste of your time. Not really worth it. If you're a gore hound, there's a couple of moments you might like a bit, but for the most part, while this movie isn't an absolute dumpster fire, it is pretty close, and at best, check out Embryo on USA Up All Night.
It's not worth it!
Hi, I'm Gilbert Godfrey.
Hi, it's Yolanda on USA.
It's so big. It's just not worth it!
I was really hoping that this movie would have been better than this, at least worth like a stream or something, but no, it's just not. No matter what angle I look at this thing, it's not worth it. It's kind of lucky it didn't get dumpster fire. I will say that much, it's not an absolute dumpster fire, but it's not far from it. So unless you like really have a hankering to see this movie for some odd reason, I would say overall, just stay away from this thing and check out something else. So there it is, guys, my review of Embryo. If you enjoyed and want more content like this, hit that subscribe button and help my little channel grow. If you liked what I had to say, give me a like. If not, let me know in the comments below why. And as always, stay sexy, Santiago. If I had to pick, I would say that the most entertaining part of this movie is a part about halfway through that takes place in a bathroom. There's a guy that Evelyn kills in this bathroom. Now, I'm not giving anything away there. You see it coming from about 1,000 miles away. But when she does disembowel this guy, it shows him laying there on the floor, and it is clearly a prosthetic body with like maybe just his top half or his head at least coming through. And he's sitting there doing this, and he's like, with his like guts and everything hanging out, and it is so fucking campy. It really harkened back to those old George A. Romero zombie flicks like Dawn of the Dead and maybe even Night of the more Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, how they acted in those. And that right there, that put a smile on my face and made me say, you know what, man? You don't need to make this movie. You're trying to make a serious movie. You need to stray away from that. You need to make a throwback George A. Romero 70s zombie flick, but make it nowadays. But just make it throwback because you got that style right there. You got that vision. That's what you need to do, my man. So if you see this review and you take nothing else away from the negative things that I said about it, take this. This is the best advice I can give you. Make a throwback old school, like even an Italian horror zombie flick or something like that. You would hit gold with that, my man. Fucking gold.